So, team, here we are at Wherry Lagoon in New South Wales, Australia. And you can see rolling hills there in the background and dairy farms. It's a beautiful part of the South Coast. We're in week 3. This is where we discover, we find out. Now, that interview that we conducted last week, what are the main issues in the things that stakeholders have raised? And it's going to be a wonderful opportunity for you to distill those comments and reflections and statements and questions made by your interviewee. It's so exciting, this stage. It means that you know your transcript pretty well. You've probably even listened to it a couple of times. I would suggest that with interviews that you do as a researcher, as a practitioner, you take time to hear it once, hear it twice, and hear it 3 times. You know, this is not where you've just note taken. This is where you've actually got a recording or a transcript even. And if you're not so much a listener, perhaps what you want to do is read the transcript about 3 times. And by reading, I don't mean every single word, although it's always fun to do that on Discovery. But I would encourage you to go through and find those golden nugget moments. Usually what I do after an interview, right after, is that I go and take some notes for myself to remember the points that I don't want to ever forget. I learn things from speaking to everyone when I'm interviewing, and I take down the most important points that hit me hard, you know, in my mind and in my heart right after the interview. And it doesn't have to be perfect notes. I might write like 6 or 7 keywords, a couple of keywords on each line. But it helps you to trigger that particular interview, especially in the future when you're going to be doing many of these. And so the whole job now is to work with a clean transcript from week 2. So the outcome of week 2 is used in week 3. And for you to discover what I've called what those pain points are. And pain points, let's just call them issues for a second. They could be sticky points. They could be points that the interviewee thinks are really important. But that's what you're going to base your pain chain chart on. And pain chains are important because they identify the pains the interviewee is raising, the reasons for those pains, and possible ways to overcome them. Now, remember, there are no silver bullet solutions. And you need holistic solutions. While we are studying public interest technology, some of your strategies will not be technical, but will feed into the technical. And remember what I said about technical. It's not actually gadgetry all the time. It could be processes, not so much products or apps. And that this process will take time. You know, you can't rid a harbour of pollution overnight. It doesn't work like that. And there are things that you have to change in your local area to eradicate plastics, for example, from the bottom of the ocean. So that's really important to garner. And there's a codification process that takes place. And that codification process, if I was to break it down really plainly in English, it's pretty much go through that interview, get a highlighter out, and start highlighting those important terms or phrases that you know you have to mention in the pain chain chart. Now, I've given you a pain chain chart that I used back in 2002. It came out of some IBM teaching materials, course materials from the days I was teaching e-business. But a lot of different companies refer to different frameworks. Even in Mural, you're going to find like an issues chart. Just have a look at the second one, for example, number 2 that I've provided for you. There's ways that you can use templates to write these down. But back to the codifying, those important terms and phrases are those things that you have to highlight. And you can use tools like NVivo software or Leximancer software or F4 Analyzer or a whole bunch of other ones that are readily available. But I don't want you to go to any expense. A lot of these software, they rely on Bayesian algorithms, and what they do is they look at hits and terms, and they create a thesaurus. And the thesaurus usually is like a complete list of those important terms. And you might say, but how does a computer know what's important? Well, it's just really looking at individual words and matching it to a dictionary, and then coming up with a complete long list, and then looking at hits, chunks of like 3 or 4 lines, and saying, okay, this term belongs to this hit, and it occurs like 3 times in the same chunk. But you're also able to force a chunk or a hit as being 8 lines or 12 lines or 4 lines or whatever you want it to be. It could be a page. But the outcomes of these thesauri, or the thesaurus, I should say, is a concept map, like a gravity map that says, okay, if the term pollution was mentioned, was it co-located with the word plastic? If the term pollution was mentioned, was there a negative vibe around that tonality? And what we're seeing is these concept analyzers getting smarter and smarter. They are able to tell you the gravity between terms and the co-location of terms within hits. So as I said, pollution could be surrounded by, county, could be surrounded by regulation, could be surrounded by plastics, could be surrounded by fish and other things. And then you might have another word like tourism and harbour and attraction and visitors and waste. And what you've got is perhaps the word waste linked up to the word plastic in this concept map. And I can provide for you examples. I did provide for you the work of a previous PhD student, Dr. Alexander Hayes, who conducted about 100 interviews during his PhD, of which 50 were used legitimately in terms of scope and accessibility and consent. And he has a site on Figshare that you can go to, which shows you all the different elements that he went through, all the different steps, how he codified, how he then went from the codification to an actual model or a framework. And so there are different means and ends to interviews and different ways you can analyze. You can use an automated tool that's called concept analysis and content analysis. So the content analyzers produce concept maps or other sort of graphs to represent the gravity between the terms. You could use qualitative thematic analysis, which is, I'm just going to look at this, read it and interpret it and codify using pen and pencil. And now we have spreadsheets. We can do additional things like count frequency of terms, although that may not be so relevant here. In our qualitative interviews for PIP 502, what we're looking at is something called literal replication. What were the most diverse issues identified in the interview? And remember, we're only doing a single interview. And we're not going to get the same kind of replication as if we were doing 8 interviews or 30 interviews. And so don't be hard on yourself is the main thing. This is just an exercise whereby I take you through one stakeholder's perspective, one interviewee, of pains, reasons for the pains and the way we're going to overcome them. And discovery is an important point because your whole project hinges on the proof of that discovery. So friends, I want you to take time, apart from identifying those key issues, I want you to come up with a list of important quotes. So if I asked you tomorrow, hey, why don't we publish something in Slate? Or why don't we publish something in The Conversation from a primary stakeholder? Or let's publish something in the local newspaper. Or let's publish something on the Marine Centre website with the consent of the end user. What quotes would you choose? So they're the golden nuggets I was referring to earlier. The quote of the quotes. If I was to ask you for 3 grabs, what would that be? And I call a grab like 1 or 2 sentences. It's a quick snapshot of the most important points. And so that's a grab, and that's like your golden nuggets, but you need to know what they are. Now, what I want you to do is to keep all the phases of this particular week's assessment task. So the first one is to start with the clean transcription. The second one is to highlight or codify the main phrases or terms. And the next one is sort of to take those and distill the issues into the pain chain chart. And that's what I really want you to focus on, those sort of 3 steps and that final outcome of the pain chain chart. And then the reasons for those pains and those issues and how you're going to overcome them using the public interest technology solution. Perhaps the interviewee has offered some insights. Perhaps you're getting closer to knowing what that might be. And as we said, it could be a process instead of a product. And I want you to really focus on that, that what you might be proposing just as a first start before we hit the applied project in more detail in the future semesters is what are the big issues, how we might go approaching them in order to solve them, and where do we begin with asking those sort of response design questions, because after discovery is going to be design. So that's a bit on the codification process of transcripts and interviews and the outcomes which can form qualitative work as in prose, and can also form sort of a transformation into particular charts or diagrams. If you don't like IBM's pain chain chart, create your own. Look at Mural, look on the web, look at my toolkits. I think I've provided about 15 toolkits. There are so many ways to present what I'm asking you to. So find the one that suits you the best for your project, and we can work from there. Thanks, team.